This is a Johnson Century Model 115. It was made between 1980 and 1982. It has what appears to be a cast frame, an aluminum cover, and plastic rear covers. And this is a nice little reel. You can usually pick these up for $5 or less if you're going to a flea market or maybe an antique mall or something like that. You probably pay more on an online auction. But this is my first 115, and I paid about $5 for it, and as you can see, it just barely turns, and that's an indication of dried grease. This thing has been setting for a long time, and it's locked up because of dried grease. So we're going to disassemble this and service it and get it back to running like new. So I'm going to take off the front cover. You can see it is in fact farm fresh. And one of the first things I like to do is take off the spinner head and take off the spool and get all of that old line off of there. So definitely a lot of significant corrosion in there. And I'm gonna stop the camera while I get rid of this line. Okay, I got the line off the spool. I'll put that in the spinner head and clip into the parts tray, and the line stop, which appears to be rubber. I don't see any cracks in it yet. And now I think we'll go ahead and take off the handle. And the side plates. You can see quite dirty in there. And of course, I have this on video, and so I don't have to worry quite as much about taking pictures to make sure everything goes back the way it was. But when you're doing this on your own, of course, taking pictures is very, very helpful, because it's easy to forget where things went. You can see in this case, there's this little brass stop here that fits into that hole there. And I assume that's the anti-reverse. So we'll pull that out and put that in the parts tray and take that piece off. Remember, that goes like that. And so that piece appears to be free of any other parts, as does the other side plate. And now, let's see here. We should be able to remove the button. And my next question is, how do we remove this? First of all, let's reduce the drag on it to 0. Get all the tension off of that. But that should push through there. Again, this is the first one of these I've ever done, so I'm kind of learning as I go. But I would think that thing must be corroded in there. Yeah, so it's just a matter of that pinion gear being stuck in there, corroded in there, and that's one of the reasons why this thing wouldn't turn. There's all that dried grease in there. So then you can think should be able to winkle that thing out of there. It's almost like that spring is compressed. There. Now it comes out. You can see that the spring isn't even releasing on that thing. It's just gummed up. So, put that on the parts tray. Take out this little drag tightening lever here. Remember that goes with the concave side up. And then we can see about removing these drag rings. So that one, I'm going to put these in my parts pile in order so I don't lose which order they were in. I'm going to just lay those down in order. I think I may have lost you there once and I was out of the view. Alright, so there's the third brake ring, and then you have this little washer doohickey here. Put that down there. And so now it's pretty much totally disassembled. And what I like to do at this point is thoroughly clean every part. It's not, for me, it's not just enough to make it functional, but to get it thoroughly clean and as much like new as possible. And that includes, you know, if you find a bunch of dried up grease, say on your pinion gear like this, and you clean all of that off and lubricate that, and then stick it back in the journal from which it came, and you haven't cleaned that out, then you've only done half the work. Because I can guarantee you, if there's dried grease on this shaft, there's going to be dried grease in there. So you need to get a solvent down in there with a Q-tip and get that cleaned out if you want it to work as smoothly as it possibly can. So let's move over to the sink and start cleaning parts. Okay, so basically what I use for cleaning parts is an old toothbrush and some Dawn dishwashing soap and Q-tips and occasionally WD-40. So I'm just going to start with the body. And you've got years and years of scum from the lake that's come off the line on the inside of there. And so in addition to just scrubbing with a toothbrush, you may have to get in there with a sponge pad and get that off. And of course you want to get into all the little grooves and things. And this shows some signs of oxidation. So when I get all done, we'll see what a little bit of rubbing compound will do to shine up this cover like new, because it was pretty matte colored and without much shine to it when I started it. I'm going to get in there with the sponge pad and get any of that lake grime off of the inside of there and get those threads cleaned out so the cover goes on nicely. Some of that looks like overspray from when they painted the cap. Okay, so now on to the body. Again, get all those threads out of there. If you're gonna, like I said, some people, they just make them functional. They don't worry about getting it perfectly clean, but quite frankly, if you don't put it under the sink and you don't scrub it well, there's always the chance that there's going to be grains of sand in there and stuff that you're not rinsing out. You're not getting out of the inside of the reel, and then those can cause wear and damage on the gears and so on. So I always like to have a liquid solvent. Water is the universal solvent, and then a little bit of soap to get rid of any oils and greases, and occasionally some WD-40, and then rinse it off, get out any potential loose particles. And as I mentioned earlier, another really important thing to do is I'm going to cover up the other side of that, where that shaft goes in, and I'm going to fill that with WD-40. And then I'm going to go in there with a Q-tip and just really look at the gunk in there. If you forget that step, you're only doing half of the job. Look at that. If you just wipe off the shaft and you don't go in there and clean out the journal or whatever you want to call it, you've not done a complete and thorough cleaning, and you're not going to have as smooth of a reel. So that one's clean. Go on to the spool. And that hot water, if you're using hot water, that'll also soften up the grease. Whether you're using dish soap or WD-40, that warm water will loosen up some of that hardened grease. So you want to get that as clean as you can. And this side plate here, one of them. And again, if you want it to be as smooth as it can be, another place on the reel that can be tight and restrict free movement is that journal where the crank shaft goes through, where the crank gear is. And so you can clean the crank gear shaft, but if you don't get inside here and clean that, half your dried up grease is in there. So I put my finger over one hole, let it fill up, put with WD-40, and then get in there with a Q-tip and clean all that out. Look at that. When that gear shaft and that journal is all cleaned out, that will move very smoothly and easily. Now if I do any more of these videos, I'm probably not going to show this washing and cleaning step on every one, because that might get a little bit boring. But just this time around, just to show you the effort that goes into cleaning them and making them look like new. And also, again, there's that functionality aspect of making sure that any loose debris, sand grains or whatever, are rinsed out of there so they don't get the gear. Do the handle. There's a lot of grime that ends up on these crank handles from fishing hands and warm dirt covered hands. You get that all cleaned up. And there's a lot of dry grease in that spinner head. Might even hit that with a little WD-40. Look at that. That's going to affect the functioning. Look at that. It's going to affect the functioning of your line guide there, or your line pickup. And you can inspect this for any cuts in the, if it was used a lot, sometimes somebody gets snagged, and they'll have it on full drag, and they'll be working away on it, and you can get, the line can sort of cut into the metal. And if you see that, if you see a cut in there, you can take care of that by grinding it smooth. Here's the rubber line stop. Probably want to be somewhat careful with this, because these can get brittle. In which case you can make new ones out of a carefully sized O-ring or some other fix-it. That doesn't look too bad. And it's still somewhat supple, so I think that's going to be okay. And the push button is really dirty, as was everything with this reel. Some grease or something in there. And this is the top of the drag dial and the cover for the drag. Get that cleaned up. There's the top cover for the drag adjustment and the drag dial, the adjuster. Get that all cleaned up. And now some of the really important parts, like the gears. So this one is pretty caked on. So I'm going to let it soak in the WD-40 for a few seconds and start working that off. And this is one, these are, when you start getting into the gears, you know, after I do the cleaning in the sink, I'll go through and run a tiny flathead screwdriver, in most cases, through each tooth, especially on the pinion gear, to make sure that there's not any hard grease or debris in the teeth. I had to get a little screwdriver and pop that up, pop that little brass washer up so I could get down inside there. Clearly dried grease down in there and on the other side. Push that back down. The other thing I'll oftentimes do is take some steel wool and just get any other residual grease off that gear shaft. Here's a little anti-reverse. And of course you want to make sure your little strainer is in your sink when you're dealing with these little parts, so that they don't end up going down the drain. And here's that little drag tension lever, full of grease. You can always fast forward through all this stuff and get to the good stuff, but just to document how thorough I like to clean them. And now we're onto that pinion gear. And of course this is one where I'm going to want to get my tiny, tiny flat-bladed screwdriver and get in there and get all that hard grease and sand. You can see, look at it pop out of there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just full of gunk down inside those gears. And that can loosen it up. Some of it will come out with the screwdriver. The rest gets loosened up so that when you run the brush back over it, it'll all come out. But that is just really gummed up. And then I like to push that gear up, kind of hard to do, and hold it in place and get some WD-40 up underneath there, because this thing gets sticky too, and work that back and forth so that that moves freely when you push the button on the reel. So get that WD-40 working in there. So that's good and clean now. And that's everything. That's all the parts individually cleaned and degreased. Now we're ready to reassemble. I did clean these, by the way, these drag rings. I didn't show that part, but and I'll go ahead and maybe run some steel wool on this corroded piece here. Shine that up like new. Okay. And again, as I mentioned before, in many cases I'll run some steel wool over these shafts. Make sure I get any residue that might still be adhering. I'm still seeing some gunk in these gears. Okay, see how we can winkle this back in there. Okay. Now I prefer to oil rather than grease the gear shafts. Others may prefer otherwise, but I pretty much restrict grease to the teeth of the gears, and I'll put oil in the journals for the various gear shafts. And I had that set at 0 with 0 drag. So I'll put that in like that. And then you're going to get that little lever on there like that. And then we should be ready to start putting our drag washers on. I am going to hit this with a little bit of grease. Okay, and so that little lever fits in that slot there, and through the shaft goes through on that side. So now the second one. And the last one. And now when I presumably, let's turn it awful hard. Now when I turn that, it's pushing down on that. And then that causes those to expand out against the spool. So now I've got it dragged completely off, and I should be ready for the spool. And I think I have that. I'm not sure. Not sure if I have that. That might supposed to be facing up to make the clicking sound. Let's try that. I think that little tab on that brass washer is supposed to face upwards. Because you should hear I think you should hear some kind of clicking sound when the drag is engaged. Let's see if that makes any sense. So it still can't turn, but that should make some kind of clicking sound when the drag's engaged. Now, if I weren't videoing this, I would have pictures and I could just go back and look. I'm not going to stop the video right now and go back and look because I think I'm right here. So now when I put this on and I turn it, it's still not really making a clicking sound. Well, I may find out when I watch the video that whether or not I've got that on right, but if I do tighten down the drag, this is definitely getting harder to turn, so I know the drag is working. Yeah, it can't be turned at all now, so. All right, then the clip goes in there. That fits relatively loosely. Nothing difficult about putting that in or taking that off. And I suppose I better dry this off and put a little drop of oil on the line pickup. Get that a little bit more dry. And just run that back and forth a few times, get that oil underneath there. Clean off that shaft keeps. Probably should have reassembled the backside first so I get this shaft to keep from falling out. And put the nut and line stop back into place. And now we should be getting close to putting the remaining crank gear in and getting this thing back together. There goes the button. Got to make sure that post threads through the hole on the push button. And now a little bit of grease. Now some of these reels, the anti-reverse mechanism, even when it's not engaged, can be kind of noisy, those gears back there. And sometimes if that's the case, I'll put a little grease on those. It tends to quiet it down so you don't have to hear it while you're winding in. You hear that thing rattling, even when it's not on, even when you're going forward. Okay, so now we're going to insert that plate there and insert our screws. And then our crank and nut. Yes, a ratchet socket would be better for this, but especially if you don't want, if it's a shelf item, you're just going to sit on a shelf and you want everything to be cosmetic, you don't necessarily want plier marks on your nut. And then finally, dry this off a bit. You can see that it's very matte colored. I don't know, I doubt if they were that way new. I bet you, I'll see if I can get some buffing compound and put it on there and shine that up. But get our cover back on. And what was a reel that you could not even turn the handle on now is as smooth as silk and ready to fish again. A beautiful little Johnson Century 115, perfect for pan fishing, small bass, very light, solid reel, very nice, made in USA. Ready to go fishing again. When you get this all buttoned back up, put a drop or two of oil in that handle blade there, and spin that around and run that around really good. More often than not, if you have a squeaky reel or you hear a squeaking, it's because that blade on that handle hasn't been properly lubricated.